Character stats, what are they good for? I've had a lot of people tell me that they have no idea what to do with them or how to make sense of them or whatever. They'll slap on mods on their armor, but the character stats, well, let's make this pretty easy to understand so you can build your character out to be as good as it possibly can. Going into your character screen, when you look along the right side of your character to the left side of your armor, you'll see that you have a column of numbers, and these are the different character stats that you can invest in. And if you hover over them, you'll see a little explanation of what they mean, what tier you're currently at with your current armor set, what that gives you, and what you would get if you invested more points into those. Character stats we have are mobility, resilience, recovery, discipline, intellect, and strength. And in this video, we're going to go over each of these and which ones you should prioritize. First off, each armor piece you get has a random distribution of stats. So I do not have a triple 100 build as many would like me to have because I just don't get good drops when it comes to triple 100s. However, I'm going to address this right away. I am currently collecting armor pieces that have 20 or more stats in 2 places that I want them. I prioritize resilience, recovery, and intellect. So if I get something that has, I might go for 19, but if it's 20 or more in 2 of those 3 spots, I will throw it in the vault. And later on, I'm going to work on slapping together a triple 100 build. You'll know what we mean by triple 100 by the end of this video. So when you pull up your armor piece, you will see the stats, and that is not for one armor piece. That's actually for the entire armor set that you have on. So you can see how this piece fits into the entire armor set. So with the five armor pieces that I currently have in this character, I have 23 mobility, 88 resilience, 71 recov, 40 discipline, 62 intellect, and 48 strength. Now, if I click on this little shield thing here, toggle the stat display, that will show the stats for this one particular piece of armor. I personally do not value 19 strength, but that's what I have. And I have, you can see that I've got 23 recov, which is pretty good, and 16 resilience, which actually is pretty good for a single piece of armor. Overall, I have 83 points that are distributed among these 6 categories, and 12 of those points comes from masterworking it. So when you max this out, you masterwork it, you get it to a 10th tier armor piece. It will add 2 points to each row, to each stat. So what do all of these mean? Starting with mobility. Mobility increases your movement speed and maximum jump height. Now, if I'm trying to cheese a chest in Last Wish or get to some other spot that I normally wouldn't be able to get to, I might put on a bunch of armor pieces and mods to get me up to 70, 80, maybe even 100 mobility so I can jump higher. That's very rare. I don't really need to jump that high for most activities in the game. Like I said, it's mostly when I'm trying to cheese something to get to something I shouldn't be able to get to. Resilience increases the amount of damage you can take before dying and increases your shield capacity. It reduces the damage taken from combatants. It also reduces the amount of damage you take when breaking out of stasis. This is especially useful in Crucible. Now, I will tell you that when I play in raids or nightfalls and one of my teammates is dying a lot, it's usually it's always because the resilience is under 70. We're going to talk a little bit more about where that stat should be, but resilience is really something you should prioritize in all game modes in Destiny. Recovery. This reduces the cooldown of the Warlock's class ability, but it also increases the speed at which you regain lost health. So if you take a few shots, you need to duck for cover and stand there for a few seconds to get your health back. That's exactly what recovery will affect. Discipline decreases the cooldown time of your grenades, allowing you to use them more often. Stasis abilities have longer cooldowns than Arc, Solar, and Void abilities. It's worth noting that for the stats that have an actual timer, so if you look at this, the grenade ability cooldown says 1 minute and 27 seconds. That's if I'm just standing there and doing nothing. Intellect decreases the cooldown of your super ability, allowing you to use it more often. This is why people prioritize intellect. You're probably also going to want a really high intellect for PvP because it is much harder to get your supers in PvP. In PvE, it's not really as important because you can use a lot of different armor mods to get that super very fast. My intellect on this build is 758, but in the right conditions, I can actually get my super in less than a minute. Strength decreases the cooldown time of your melee ability, allowing you to use it more often. Stasis abilities have longer cooldowns than arc, solar, and void abilities. So it's really important to point out strength does not make your melee more impactful. It's just your charged melee when the ability comes up. All right, let's break down these character stat descriptions and talk about what these different numbers actually mean. So we're looking at resilience here. My character is currently, she currently has 88 out of 100 resilience. That means she's in tier 8, and it's the tier that determines how much damage reduction we take here. So I'm almost to 90, but it doesn't mean anything. 81, 88, they're both exactly the same because they're in the 8th tier. So go by that bar that you have there. It's the brighter part of the bar that matters, not the darker part. The darker part is just showing you that if you can somehow get 2 more points in there, you'll be at the next tier, which is tier 9. As you can see here at tier 8, we're currently getting 26% damage reduction. Now, if we add 2 more points and we get to 90, we'll have tier 9 damage reduction. And at the very bottom there, you'll see that it shows you if you get to tier 9, you'll have 32%. So that's just a little comparison to let you know like what you would get if you could get to the next tier. And 6% is pretty darn nice, and it can make a huge difference. Looking at intellect, I wanted to go over intellect because instead of having a percentage, this one actually has a timer, and you're going to have this on your abilities. Your abilities have cooldown timers, and this could really help you determine whether or not you want to invest more points in it. Now, for me, intellect is something that I do put more points in because it is important. And when you're waiting around for a super in one of those situations where you just can't get any more grenade kills because everything's dead and you're waiting to super a boss, for example, this is where this timer is really going to be helpful. I'm going to be real though, going from 758 to 737, that's not a huge increase from tier 6 to tier 7 when it comes to the super ability cooldown, but this is my 3rd highest priority stat, and so this is something I will dump points into. So we're at intellect tier 6 now. This one's really nice because I have only 62 points instead of 68. So we had 88 points on the other one, so we had 8 wasted points. This one has only 62 points, and we only have 2 wasted points. Remember, we're in the 6th tier. That's what matters. 62 is the same as 60. When we get a boost, that's when we get to 70. The next boost is at 80. The next one's at 100. And just to let you know, 100 is the max for every single tier. So once you hit 100, that's it. Any point above 100 is a waste. One final thing with the character stats that have a timer, these are all ability character stats. So these are going to affect your super, like with intellect, your melee with strength, and your grenade with discipline. And the timer ones, I typically don't prioritize those because you can get those pretty fast using general armor mods and combat related mods. And we'll go over those in another video. With that said, let's go over which one should have priority. Now, a lot of this is opinion based, and I will say, I do know elite players who don't invest anything in resilience, and they put everything into mobility and recovery. These are usually top tier PvP players. They need that speed. They're usually hunter mains too. And hunter mains who play a lot of PvP generally require a lot of mobility. They can outrun their enemies. They can escape their enemies. They can get that time to use that recov and then go back out and counter their enemies. Most people in this game are not elite. Otherwise, you wouldn't be elite if you were just like everybody else. That's just how it is. So for most folks, what you should prioritize, especially for PvE, is resilience. Now, recovery is second to resilience. The reason why, and a lot of people think that if you have a lot of recov, that's it, game over, you've won. That's not actually true. Recovery only works if you're still alive. And we're going to go over that a little bit more, but that's why you want resilience to be high. That's why you should always prioritize resilience in your builds, because if something one-taps you, that recuv is completely useless. I don't care if it's 100. Intellect is next. That is the super character stat, and I mean, who doesn't want a super? The rest of these are actually ability character stats, with the exception of mobility, and so that's why they're all at the bottom. Mobility, we already covered about why you would want high mobility, but I will say another reason why you don't need to dump a ton of stats in mobility is because if you are playing PvP, there are 2 charged with light mods that you could use that automatically give you, I believe it's, one gives you plus 20 mobility and the other one gives you plus 20 strength. So you don't need to put a lot of effort in putting all of your points into those 2 if you're going to use those mods. And I do highly recommend using those mods for PvP. Most of my ability builds center around discipline, and you can tell I have a 40 discipline here. It's the little grenade. That, I usually have discipline around 40. It doesn't really matter too much because if I'm getting my abilities off correctly, I'm cycling through them, and each time I use one ability, it feeds another one, and I get it back almost immediately. So I don't really have a use for the cooldown on discipline if other things are just giving me grenade energy back. Next, we have mobility, and then, finally, we have strength. Now, I do have melee builds, but because of the armor mods that we have in this game, you really don't need to prioritize strength. However, if you do use melee in PvP, strength could be really useful. In fact, mobility and strength, and I'm a PvE main, I'm not a PvPer, but I do go in with my PvE builds. Strength and mobility really, I believe, are more useful to the PvP community, but again, it's a playstyle thing. If you're sitting back and you're not prioritizing melee kills and you're not outrunning people, you're like shooting a pulse rifle or you're sniping, you don't need mobility, you don't need strength. Keep them low, don't waste your points. If you're super aggressive, you're the hand cannon shotgun guy who gets in people's faces and you're taking a lot of risks, then you're gonna want to have a lot of points in these. So that's the exception to the rule. Moving forward with all of that said, let's talk about what we would want for our builds normally. So mobility, as I said, is not a priority except in PvP. Maybe there are a lot of Warlock mains who prefer not to use high mobility because it can actually affect their aim when they're trying to, for example, snipe from the air. A lot of them have complained about how mobility affects their jumping, their skating. It's not always optimal, so if you are a Warlock main and you're interested in using a lot of mobility, test out the different levels and just see how it feels. Resilience, you will get one shot below 70 minimum and you'll get one shot by a lot of things. Don't even bother going into a raid below 70. Now, if you're an elite player, this doesn't apply to you. In fact, if you're elite, you're probably not even watching this video. But 70 minimum will keep the great majority of the player base up instead of being a liability. 100 resilience is a huge help. I do recommend trying to get to it, so just aim for full points. If you have 70 resilience and you only have enough on an armor piece to add like a minimum resilience mod or whatever it's called, minor resilience mod that only gives you 5 points, there's no point in using that mod because 75 is still in the same tier as 70. But if you can put a major resilience mod on or a regular resilience mod, whatever it's called, that 70 will bump up to 80. Boom, you're in the next tier. You're going to have more resilience. So it's worth it. 80 is better than 70. 90 is better than 80. The gains are definitely worth it at this point. Sometimes going into the next tier can have diminishing returns. So like, is it really worth it to invest your armor points into a tier if going from 70 to 80 doesn't really benefit you that much? For example, if you have discipline and you invest 10 points into a tier 4 discipline stat, that will bring you up to tier 5. And your grenade, which was charging in 1 minute and 27 seconds, will now charge in 1 minute and 15 seconds. So that's only a gain of 12 seconds. Is it really worth it to invest those points into discipline for only 12 seconds? So you might be better off putting those points somewhere else like resilience. So just when you're trying to figure out where to put your extra points, just really look at that. But I highly recommend resilience being the top priority. Now, let's say you have extra points and your recovery is only 50. and you have like 80 resilience, go ahead and put your extra mods into your recovery so you can get that up to 60. Have a 60 minimum for recovery. You don't want to wait too long for it. It does make a difference. Recovery is useless if you're dead, which is why I tell people to prioritize resilience. But I try to keep my recovery at about 10 less than resilience. If I could have both of at 100, that would be ideal. But at the minimum, get your recuv to 60. Discipline is not a priority at all for the reasons I've stated. This is something that you can feed with other mods, and you can have grenade uptime almost constantly on some builds. So investing points into that to change the timer for a few seconds for something that takes over a minute, like it's not even worth it. Just 40 is fine. I do try to keep this around 40 or 50, but I'll be honest, it usually gets to 40 or 50 naturally. I don't even try to dump points into it. I focus on resilience, recovery, and intellect. Intellect's the next one. Now, this is an ability character stat, but we do like to get those supers, and sometimes you run out of abilities because of suboptimal situations, and you need to get that super back, and you don't want to be waiting there forever. So try to get at least 60. 70 is ideal. 100, of course, is preferred. Strength is just not a priority. Not at all. Again, you may like it for PvP, but you don't need it for PvE. I talked about adding points from your armor set. So how do you do that? When you go into your armor piece, you'll see this very first slot here. It's the general armor mod. And the general armor mod will give you the option of adding a minor mod, which is +5 character stat points for whichever one you select. So this is discipline right here. Or you'll have the regular mod, which is +10. So this is +10 discipline. As you can see on here, I have a minor recovery mod of +5 recovery to get me to the 7th tier. I'm at 71 recovery here. This is an ideal situation. I'm not wasting points. Those extra 5 points took me from 66 to 70. And that is character stats. It's really not that complicated, but I hope you have what you need now to help make that perfect armor set. If you'd like to support this channel, liking and commenting on the videos tells YouTube to share these videos with others who may find them useful. If you'd like to provide monetary support to help keep this channel up and running, visit my locals and subscribe star communities.